We were muted. Okay, but now you can. Should I put the slide on already?
Yes,
Okay.
please. Good morning, everyone. I think most of you know me. I'm Vicki Finney-Frock. And Rabbi's not kidding. I do get like emails continuously. I, for the first time in my life, figured out how to set up a folder to put these emails in because they were clogging up everything else. So, plus they want me to join WhatsApp groups and they want me to join other groups. And I keep saying, we at Sinai, we do things differently. We do things our own way. So we cannot let Sinai down and we all have to vote. Perfect. So I'm going to talk about the World Zionist Congress election, which has already started about 2 weeks ago. And I think if you went to Pi Day, you would have already heard about it. And we've got some posters up, which I'll talk about more. But let's start with what is the World Zionist Congress? And the way we're going to do it, I'm going to give this brief overview. Thanks to the people at URJ, I do have a slide presentation. And then Rabbi and I are going to kind of do a little back and forth talking. I'll ask him some questions, and he's going to give us his insights and his thoughts on both what it is to be a Reform rabbi, but even more so, a Reform rabbi in Israel, and how our votes impact what he can and cannot do there. So Theodore Herzl established the World Zionist Congress in 1897, long before Israel ever became a state. He had this notion that the only way that Jewish people could survive and be in a place safe and away from anti-Semitism was if we had some kind of world congress where we could join together and make decisions. It's sometimes called the Parliament of the Jewish People, and every 5 years there is a meeting, a worldwide meeting of all of these 500 delegates to discuss in part how to spend $5 billion over 5 years. So it's $1 billion a year that's at stake. And depending on how our votes go and how our delegates are elected determines how much of that pot the reform movement gets. He's letting people in here. I lost my slide.
There you go. Here you go.
There we go. So the next election has already started. The World Zionist Congress gives diaspora Jews a voice. And we have the power. It's not just the money, but it's resources and it's land and it's our values that come into play.
Yeah. Go ahead.
We're letting people in, so, okay. So this is the former director of Israel Religious Action Center. Israel is far too important to be left in the hand of Israelis alone. What happens in Israel affects every Jew on the planet. And honestly, the past year and a half, this couldn't be more true. We've all had that experience. So just as we feel a moral obligation to vote in our country's elections, Jews worldwide are morally obligated to vote in these elections. Really, our voice needs to count. I'm going to play a short 2-minute video.
We're sitting by the speaker, but they're not.
In the past year, we've seen more than ever that what happens in Israel impacts Jews across the globe.
As an American Jew, you have the power to help shape the future of Israel by joining our campaign and voting in the 2025 World Zionist Congress elections.
The World Zionist Congress is a democratically elected international body that convenes every 5 years and the one chance for diaspora Jews like you to have a voice and a vote in Israel.
The World Zionist Congress controls billions in funding and makes policy that affects Jews in Israel and across the world.
The election is a way for you to support democracy, pluralism, security, and a path to peace in Israel. to stand up for women's and LGBTQ plus rights and against future settlement expansion in the West Bank.
If we don't vote and we don't show up, we know who will. Our extremist ultra-Orthodox opponents stand against these values, have fought us at every turn, and are mobilizing to roll back any progress we've made. It will take all of us to stop them.
We need Israel to reflect our Reformed Jewish values, where your children and grandchildren will be safe and welcome.
Reformed Jewish members of the Congress help promote our values on issues that affect all of us in the Jewish community.
The election is March 10th through May 4th, 2025.
U.S. citizens or permanent residents who are Jewish and at least 18 years old can vote for the Reform slate online or by paper ballot.
There's a $5 charge to cover the cost of the election, but you can turn your $5 into $5 billion of funding support for our values in Israel.
We're building a movement across the country to get our family, friends, and neighbors out to vote in this crucial election. We need your help. Please join us.
We'll try to move forward.
It doesn't for some reason. When I
There
did
you
it.
go.
Oh, there we go. So what's interesting about that video is they also sent out a video that the ultra-Orthodox are using. And basically the ultra-Orthodox's video is an extremely negative campaign. And it talks about how Reform Jews are trying to take away their Torah, and how Reform Jews are trying to get rid of Shabbat, and it's really very different than the upbeat one that we have going here. So as I've already said, why the election matters is because the more votes we get, that translates into more delegates, and more delegates results in more power, resources, and funding. There are about 500 delegates. 200 of those come from Israel, but a third of them, about 160 of them, come from the US, leaving only about 140 worldwide outside of the United States. And in the United States, the Reform movement is the largest movement. Depending on what polls you read, it's anywhere from, say, 29 to 34% of Jews identify as Reform. About the same number identify as unaffiliated.
Both,
But then how's it 30%?
because not everybody affiliates.
Right, so about 1/3 of the people don't affiliate. About 1/3 of the people identify as Reform, something like 17% conservative. This is in the US. And then Orthodox identifies in single digits. And yet they have the biggest representation in Israel, and there's only about 8% of Israelis identify as Reform Jews. It's very different there. So there's 3 different areas that are affected or that are impacted by our vote: policies, people, and land. And these are the 3 different organizations that manage those. My one takeaway, and you'll see some other slides that focus on people, but the takeaway is land, and I think Rabbi's going to talk about that also. But 13% of Israel's private land is owned by the KKL, and they're the ones that determine what to do with the land. So even if we have funding in Israel already in place to build a Reform synagogue, if we can't get the land, which is controlled by this Congress, we can't build the synagogue. This is just some of our major achievements since 2020. I'm not going to go through them all. You can kind of look at it. But again, one of the takeaways is that even though in the 2020 election, 5 years ago, the Reform movement here in the United States doubled the number of votes for Reform, for the Reform movement, because the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredi groups, they more than doubled theirs. We actually lost seats in the Congress. So despite tremendous effort and tremendous success with our voting, the number of seats we had at the World Zionist Congress went down.
I have a question about that. So I voted this week, and I went through all the slates and all that because I just wanted to see what was going on. But I didn't understand how the voting works. So when you vote for just one slate win out of the whole?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the way it works, right, there's 23 slates. Now, 5 years ago, there were 14 slates. So people keep coming up with new slates. And the way it works is it does get divided up in a sense through those 23 slates, but many of the slates work together. So for example, Reform and Conservative work together on many issues like LGBTQ plus rights. So when you are at this Congress, the seats may get divided based on the slate, but then the different slates work together to push policy
like a party,
forward.
But what I don't get is, there's 23 slates. Conceivably, each slate could get 4, 5, 6%, right? And then is there some sort of proportionality in this, or just the largest plurality gets all the seats?
No. It is done based on percentage. So the Reform movement 5 years ago had 40 of our 160 seats.
What do you mean our?
US. 40 of.
So each country is allocated a certain number of seats?
Only the US. US gets about 160 seats. Israel gets 200. The entire rest of the world gets the last just under 1/3 of the seats.
And then the slates are then given a proportion of the seats, and then all those people, like on our slate, there were 50 or 100 people on the slate. They all get a vote within this proportionality.
No, depending. So when you look at the slates, when you look online, and it'll show you, like you're saying, maybe 50 names or 100 names. Those are all names of people that would like to become a delegate, but based on the number of seats we get, we only send that many delegates.
And how's that decided? Which of those?
Which of those? I'm guessing that
There's
the
an order.
URJ.
It's very, if I understand, it's very similar to how it's in the Knesset. So if there's a party, okay, if you're the Labor
Not a
Party.
great model.
Well, I don't know that it's better or worse than any other model, really, but it all seems to be struggling. But democracies are not doing very well nowadays worldwide. But so there's a party. Let's say you're the Labor Party or the Likud Party, right? So in the Likud Party, number one is Benjamin Netanyahu. Number two, they have 120 candidates, but if according to the percentage that they win, let's say they only got 21 seats, only the 21.
I know how the order is decided in the party. How's the order decided?
Similarly, they decide internally.
Well, I have to say, I don't know if any of you have any channel to this, but that site explains none of this. None of that. There's collaboration among the slates,
Right.
Or how the slates would be very helpful. There were other.
That's why you're here today.
Other slates that were.
I know who's going to be our next representative.
There were other slates.
I know who's going to be our next representative of the World Zionist Congress. I think, David, you should become a delegate. I want to see you in this Congress. I suggest for time we'll continue. I do have I'm flying to Chicago soon, so let's continue.
Sorry.
No, that's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so this is what the fundamentalists, the ultra-Orthodox, are trying to do. And I already kind of mentioned this, but they really are trying to roll back a lot of the things that we believe in, as well as many other Reconstructionist sides with us in most ways. So the last few slides are just kind of upbeat, and they say, because of your vote, Michal and Igor had a beautiful Jewish wedding officiated by a Reform rabbi. That cannot always happen, and we'll be talking about that. Because of our vote, I should say, Sarah was able to convert with an Israeli Reform rabbi, and she and her daughter are now recognized as full Jewish citizens. something that really impacts us, patrilineal, matrilineal lineage. Because of your vote, over 300 shlichim came from Israel to work at our 14 URJ summer camps. This one they've highlighted a lot. Omer Ohana was a fiance of one of the soldiers from October 7th that died. And because they were a gay couple, he was initially denied any of the rights or privileges or financial support or benefits that a regular heterosexual couple would have received. But because of our vote, because of the push of reform movement, he was able to get it. Health providers, mental health therapy. This one caught my eye also. This is one of the big ones that the Haredi movement talks about, is that there should be no such thing as public transportation on Shabbat because it's Shabbat, but and the last one, LGBTQ plus. So that is it. If there are questions, I can take one or two, but we do want to move on because he's getting on a plane.
Yeah, we can also have
A back and forth.
Afterwards.
Yeah.
All right.
So what we thought we'd do is I'm just going to kind of ask a few questions to get his, not that he needs any help getting his thoughts started,
No.
but
Just to keep my mind from wandering on.
so to start, how did you actually get involved in the reform movement in Israel?
It's relevant because the reform movement kind of reached out to me, almost, or I would even say it was by chance. I was doing things that reform rabbis do without knowing that that's a thing. Because like many Israelis who only, that this was even more relevant about 20-something years ago, and the time that I'm talking about. In Israel, most Israelis think that if you're religious, you're Orthodox, and if not, you're secular. And there's nothing in between. It's very dichotomy. And me having left Orthodoxy at a young age, in my teens, in fact, and then in my young adult life, trying to kind of like reinvent the wheel, I was very involved in different initiatives that had to do with pluralistic, avant-garde musical initiatives in Tel Aviv and other parts of Israel. I led a musical Shabbat service in some venue. I had a radio show about the weekly portion. I did different things that I organized. I produced festivals, by the way, that had Jewish content, etc. And in other words, what reform rabbis do without knowing that that's a possibility. And one day, the venue when I was leading the Shabbat services, and closed down because the city of Tel Aviv realized that they were doing events there and wanted to start paying city taxes, and they couldn't afford it. So someone told me, no, go to the reform movement. They'll have buildings. Ask to use their basement to do your Shabbat service, or their rooftop. So I went and I met someone from the reform movement, and I said, hello, may I please use your basement? And he looked at me and said, you should become a reform rabbi. And I said, yes, but what about that rooftop? Could we get like a permission to use it? And he said, you should become a reform rabbi. So that's like for about 20 minutes, that's how the meeting went. And then I came home and I told my wife, Eliza, listen, I had this really strange meeting. Like I'm saying one thing, he's saying, she said, what did he say? He said that you should become a reform rabbi. In other words, the reform movement kind of like knew about what I was doing, and they were looking for people like me. And in fact, I started to get interested, and I went and I visited, and I realized that there's a movement like that, and I was offered a scholarship to go to rabbinic school. I said, okay, so where did this scholarship come from? I don't know that it's necessarily exactly from that channel, but some people in the world, thought about that there are people like me in Israel that, right? So that's kind of like what I'm saying. The reform movement in Israel is, and 20 years ago it was smaller. It's growing now. The reform movement in Israel is also, among other things, looking for people who are potential future leaders. Think about me 20 something years ago, okay? Still a lot of potential then. At least so they thought, right? So, so this is how it happened, and the rest is history.
Sorry for my questions, but you make it sound like it was almost an underground movement, and you didn't like it was. To me, it seems unusual or odd that you, as an interested Jew, wouldn't even know a reform movement.
So it's not that I didn't know about it. And listen, I also lived in the States for a few years during high school, but we went to a Hillel at Princeton, which was kind of conservative.
Yeah.
And somewhere over there was a Reform synagogue, but we never went there because my father is Orthodox. It's at UMass, some of you. So it's not that I didn't know about it, but I didn't think of it as a relevant option to me because it's not something that I knew. The Reform movement in Israel is tiny, and it's not part of the culture. It's more now, 20 years in, but back then in the 2000s, it was even less so. I knew it existed, I knew that there were Reform Jews, but I never really knew what it was about. And it's not just me, it's so secular Israelis who are still the majority of Israelis. Okay, people who are not Orthodox, they don't lead an Orthodox lifestyle, the synagogue, they don't go to those Orthodox. Right, and most of them are actually Reform, not in the sense that they affiliate, but in the sense like us, they will identify as Jewish. They probably many of them believe in some kind of God, right? They will celebrate the holidays. Shabbat is a special day, but they will not observe it in an Orthodox manner. Okay, so but just like I was, and I already had a master's in Jewish philosophy from Tel Aviv University. I was very involved. It's not like I came out of nowhere. But still, yes, Reform movement is almost underground in Israel. And it's also being talked badly upon by the establishment. So a lot of people think that it's a bad thing. A lot of people are buying into the idea that it's like, yes, it's coming to destroy Shabbat. It's coming to undermine. When I started to work as a Reform rabbi in the Galilee, I had a lot of suspicion against me.
Secular.
Yes, secular people who are, let's say, maybe Masorti, like traditional people who come from Sephardi backgrounds, who are half of Israel. That all this kind of Western American vibe that we have is culturally very different than them. They don't know synagogues where men and women sit together. It's hard for them to hear a woman read from the Torah. Still today, their daughters don't have bat mitzvahs, even though they're egalitarian and their wives are like executives. And but it's kind of like culturally, it's very different than who we are, and so it takes a while.
So, what is it like to be a Reform rabbi in Israel compared to what it's like to be a Reform rabbi here in the States?
Well, here we deal with the important questions, like where we create the high holidays, and over there it's just nonsense, right? Here it's really important stuff, right? Like where will? Okay, so no, seriously speaking, it's this. I say like they say in India, a country which I've never been to. They say same but different. Okay? So same but different in the sense that at the core, people are people. Life questions are life questions. Communities are communities. Events are events. Prayer is prayer. Like at the core, I think it's very similar. But there are also many cultural differences, some of which I've already spoken about. For example, if you look around the room, most of our communities are very kind of like Ashkenazi. Americans, American Jews have been living amongst mostly Christian people of certain types. That has its influences. American culture has its influences, and Israelis are Israelis. Okay, and like I said, so in Israel, there's no separation of church and state. Okay, so that idea that you pay dues to maintain your congregation is different. In Israel, money for religious services comes from taxpayers' money. Okay, however, Orthodox Judaism has a monopoly. Okay, so all the money that's coming to build synagogues, to pay for rabbis, to purchase Torahs, to whatever it is, for the most part, because there has been some change in recent years, but still, for the most part, goes to the Orthodox establishment. Okay, so if you're a Reform rabbi, it's almost like it's almost like an underground alternative resistance movement. you can't be a Reform rabbi in Israel without some sense of they're the ones in power, and we have to kind of like, right? In practicality, it also means that you're working without almost any resources. Okay, so it's very rare to find a Reform rabbi in Israel who's a full-time rabbi. And even if you are a full-time rabbi, the salary that you get doesn't sustain your family. So you usually end up working, doing other things, doing private bar mitzvahs, funerals, teaching in other places, singing in America. Yes, doing. But I eventually, then if you stay long enough, you start doing what I did, which is like you start building an organization or an NGO, a non-for-profit, and then start going to America to fundraise, right? So being a reform movement in Israel is a little bit like being a rabbi and an activist at the same time, because nothing is to be taken for granted, and you always have to like go and kind of like apologetically say, oh you're a reform rabbi, and it's kind of like you have to like, oh, so you're not a real rabbi, because we know who the real rabbis are, right? So it's kind of like that. Working as a reform rabbi in Israel is also an amazing opportunity. I had, hear people say, there's not enough Jews in Rochester. They're all aging. There's not enough. Let's merge the congregations. What's the future? In Israel, that problem does not exist. You walk in the street, there's millions of Jews around. There's a plethora of Jews, okay? And even though they may not affiliate as reform officially, like I said, most of the Jews in Israel who are either secular or lightly, traditional or whatever, right? Essentially, they are your constituency, right? So actually being a Reform rabbi in Israel, and on the bright side, gave me an opportunity to engage with a lot of people. I probably officiated more than 1,000 bar mitzvahs in my life. I led multitudes of wedding ceremonies, even though they're not, you probably know that the Reform rabbis cannot legally wed people in Israel. Again, because only Orthodox rabbis can. Still, many couples choose to come to Reform rabbis because they don't like the Orthodoxy. They don't like the fact that it's not an egalitarian service. Some couples can't get married by the Orthodox, but let's say they're the same sex. So the Orthodox will not, officiate weddings with them. Or if one of them isn't Jewish enough, according to the Orthodox establishment. There are many Jews in Israel, hundreds of thousands, including my own children, by the way, including my daughter who serves in the IDF. And she has no legal way at all to get married in Israel. She can serve in the army, she can die for her country, but she can't get married. Why? Because my wife Feliza converted through a Reform conversion. The state of Israel recognizes that conversion, so from the papers in Israel, everybody, in the official documents of the state, they have like a religious affiliation. It's like that. So the state of Israel recognizes that my wife is Jewish, that my children are Jewish. The rabbinate, that's an entity of the state. It's an arm of the state. The Orthodox rabbinate says, we don't care. They can't, we will marry them. They're not Jewish enough. You see, so, and like them, there's hundreds of thousands of people who came from the former Soviet Union, Jews who suffered from anti-Semitism there, from persecution, came to Israel, to the Jewish homeland, and then, only your father is Jewish, you're not Jewish enough. You see, so being a Reform rabbi in Israel, on the one hand, again, is tough, because you have to all the time resist the establishment that is oppressing you, basically, yeah, and the people who think like you and believe like you. On the other hand, it's been a wonderful journey, I have to say. Really, you have to be creative, because, like people say here, you think out of the box. I said, yeah, because I was for 20 years a rabbi where there was no box, there was no buildings, there was no budget, there was no board, there was nothing. There was nothing. My last pulpit. I was a rabbi of a whole region, of a whole regional council in the Galilee. They told me, this is your county, go be a Reform rabbi. No office, no budget, right? But the little salary that I did have, that comes from these budgets that we're talking about again. Actually, to be exact, the previous congregation that I worked at, in another area of the Galilee, near Haifa, 70% of my, however humble paycheck was paid by precisely this money that we're asking, that there's the World Zionist Congress, because from there it goes to the Jewish Agency, and the Jewish Agency pays the Reform Movement in Israel, and the Reform Movement pays salaries of rabbis. My last pulpit, they didn't have to do that because it was one of those regions where Reform rabbis actually got a little bit of funding from the government. Not because the government wanted to, but because the Supreme Court forced them to do so. How did we win that Supreme Court? By activist work. What's paid for the lawyers?
Yeah.
You see who won that Supreme Court appeal that got me and 17 other Reform rabbis that government support, however measle. Like the Orthodox rabbi got the cake, we got the crumbs. Really, but we still got the crumbs, which is better than nothing at all. Through these kind of budgets that Vicky is talking about. See, it's all coming together to support that in the end really translates. And like those slides that you showed, like Igor and what's her name could get. I could tell you of so many couples and so many bar bat mitzvah kids and so many Shabbat services and so many conversion people who the Orthodoxy doesn't want to convert. And just it goes on and on and on that I, through many, many years of work, first in Tel Aviv, then up north in the Galilee, and my many colleagues there, right? There's now more than 100, I think 120 or 130 Reform rabbis in Israel. And the movement and the people who work there, they're not all rabbis. That's the hard work that they're doing. Okay, so again, this World Zionist Congress, it seems very far away and remote from our lives right here, is an actual thing. And in the end, the budget we were able to funnel towards a more progressive or pluralistic, channels of operation in Israel, they do make a difference for a lot of people, and I've experienced on the ground.
I think it's really helpful because I think that what we forget is it's easy to be a Reformed Jew here in the United States, and we really are afforded all of the rights and opportunities of other Jews, but in Israel that's just not the case. And our votes really do make a difference to provide not just the finances, but the resources to fight the fights that need to be fought.
So, Vicki, I just want to thank you so much for being here today. I have worked in 5 Jewish organizations in my life. I am not a religious person. If I was pushed, I would say I probably would affiliate as a Reconstructionist, even though I'm always a member of Reformed Temple. I have a friend who flies to Israel to vote, and we've talked about how important that is to him. This is the first time, I don't know where I have been, this is the first time I've ever heard of this idea that as a Jewish person who's never been to Israel, who's not religious, that I could have part of a say. And my mind is completely blown. So I already emailed my family. I'm freaking out. So I just thank you so much for being here today, because this is what it's all about. We think we know and we don't know what we don't know. And thank you for informing us. So it makes a big difference.
That's it exactly, because people just don't know. And let me back that up when you say you emailed your family already. Anyone who has children, grandchildren, or other family members, 18 years old or older, they can vote. You don't have to be affiliated with a congregation. It's just if you're Jewish, if you're a US citizen, and if you're 18 or older. So please let your, for my family, my kids should be out there voting, and they're not affiliated. So they wouldn't know about it either.
Good point.
Yeah, you got kids.
Right. And they are affiliated. 2 out of 3.
No, what's funny is we were pushed to vote, my wife and I were pushed to vote from a friend of Modi'in, who's a Reformed Jew, who's been advocating all of her friends here through the whole Federation connection to vote on the Reform ballot.
Right.
And but it was interesting, it came sort of reverse.
Right. And Modi'in, our sister city, and anybody who's been on an Israel trip through Temple, that was one of the stops along the way, and that's a real example of what the reform movement has been able to do there.
Can I just make a comment? But the last trip that some of us were fortunate enough to go on with Rabbi Katz and Rabbi Till, I remember she attended, she with a group of female reform rabbis went to the wall, and they were treated so badly there. Apparently, according to Rabbi Till, and I have no reason not to believe that, busloads of girls from Orthodox schools were brought in, and they were throwing water bottles and spitting on these Reform rabbis from the United States, and she was just appalled, as were we. And I'm thinking, had we been there with her, I might have had to be held back, right? But I thought that was just incredible, and that was shocking to me. But also I wanted to ask, these marriages that you perform as a Reform rabbi, are they considered legal in Israel, or do these couples have to go through some other?
Yeah, so two comments, one about this question and then about the wall. The marriages that Reform rabbis such as myself, how I used to be, are not considered legal in Israel. In fact, it's by the dry law, it's actually considered illegal to perform that. It's like you're like an imposter, right? It's like if you wear the uniform of a fire marshal and you're not a fire marshal, right? It's like, how can you pretend to be something that you're not? Not that I know that any Reform rabbi ever was arrested. Once they tried and they got so much pushback that they, with the political changes in Israel, I wouldn't be surprised if we'll get to that point. But like me and most of my colleagues said, if we'd have to be thrown in prison for that, we'll do it, right? However, that we're not persecuted for doing it, still it will not be considered official, because in Israel there's no such thing as civil marriage. Only religious marriage. So if you're Christian, you can get married to a Christian by a priest. If you're a Muslim, you can get married to a Muslim by an imam. If you're a Christian who wants to marry a Muslim, you can't. Right? They want to keep you within your religion. What can you do? And then within the Jewish religion, again, only Orthodox rabbis are accepted by the state, right? Are recognized to perform weddings. So what happens, for example, if you're a Kohen and you want to marry a woman who's divorced? You can't, because according to Orthodox law, that's not allowed, right? So again, there's a whole bunch of cases where the Orthodox just won't marry you, and then there's a lot of people who are just politically aware and say we could get married by the Orthodoxy, but we don't want to because we don't think that is their ceremony does not respect women, right? So what do? These couples have to go and get married abroad, what we call in Israel Cyprus marriage. Why? Because Cyprus is the closest country, and you can do it in a day. In fact, there's more Israelis who get married in Cyprus than Cypriots every year, and the other people who go to get married in Cyprus are Lebanese, because they have the same system. So all the Israelis and Lebanese enemies, right? They meet in Cyprus at the wedding hall. So then, for example, during COVID, there was a problem because there were no flights. And all of a sudden you want to get married in a civil marriage in Cyprus or somewhere else, you can't leave. Then Utah, ever heard of Utah? The state of Utah started to do weddings on Zoom during COVID. And now Israelis are now, and then the Minister of Interior in Israel, who was from the Haredi ultra-Orthodox parties, banned it. But then now you can get married on Zoom in Israel via Utah, and it's recognized. That's like, now you don't even have to fly anymore. See, the funny thing is that each country has to recognize all the other countries' weddings, right? Because otherwise, I could have a wife in each country, and it might be wonderful, but confusing, right? So and expensive, right? So wonderful, expensive, confusing, and immoral, right? So for example, two friends of mine who are two men who got married. One of them, they got married in New Jersey. Israel doesn't recognize gay marriage, but it does recognize New Jersey's marriage. You see, so that two men could become married in Israel. See, so that's how they do it. It's really like this. It shouldn't be this way. It's messed up. People who are poor can't afford to fly, right? So it's like really affected the lower classes more. That's how. Yet I officiated so many when I was a young rabbi in Tel Aviv. Oh my God, in the summer every week 2-3 weddings. It's not that the Israeli couples don't come to us. It's just not recognized. And about the wall. The wall is a very sad story because the wall is a symbol of Judaism, right? Every person tells you the wall, right? And you come to the wall and it's run like an Orthodox synagogue. Men are here, women are here, very strict. You can't. By the way, when I was a kid, it wasn't as strict. It became more and more ultra-Orthodox as we went along, like many things in Israel. I grew up in Jerusalem. We go there all the time. So it changed. It became more and more strict as time went by. And then the reform, through a lot of advocacy and fighting, did manage to get a little platform. Maybe like on the other side, you go down, and that's where I would officiate multitudes of Nei Mitzvah ceremonies for Americans who would come to. They want the bar mitzvah to be held in Jerusalem. Okay, they call me. I drive from the Galilee. I officiate the ceremony, but that is not considered to be part of the official site of the wall. And because so you see, so the national monument is like that's the entrance, and then that one is on the side, and there's no bathroom, and it's not accessible, and they make it very hard for you. And then there was a compromise that was reached a few Netanyahu governments ago. Like, who remember this now? Who remember, like, there's a war and everything, right? And they're destroying the Supreme Court in Israel and all that. There was a compromise that was reached that was supposed to be that the egalitarian section of the wall would become part of the main thing, and you enter, and then you can choose men, women, or egalitarian, which would have made it wonderful. But then after it was signed, guess what Netanyahu did? He backed off. Why? Because the ultra-Orthodox say, if you're not doing that, we're getting out of your government. You're not going to be the prime minister anymore. So the women of the wall that you're talking about, they go every Rosh Chodesh, at the beginning of each Hebrew month, they go to do a women's Torah reading in the women's section of the Orthodox wall, which is the main one, because they say, hey, we're women, we want to read that. Our custom is to read in the Torah. And they get all the violence that you're talking about. They get the violence, they get spat on, they get cursed. The ultra-Orthodox will bring buses and buses of girls from the seminars and men, and ultra-Orthodox men who would spit and curse on those women and their male supporters who come to support them. So it's become very aggressive and divisive rather than a unifying symbol for the Jewish people. And it just symbolizes basically the situation. We could say, well, what do we care about the wall? It's just an old wall. But because it's a symbol, it is important, right?
Ron?
And it's not only the wall. There's some Modine visitors that we've been friends with for probably 25 years. Ronnie is one who comes here, and my cousin Val. They go to the wall every month on Rosh Chodesh. But it's not only the wall they go to. There are buses where ultra-Orthodox do not want men and women sitting near each other. So the paradigm they have, which is kind of like 3 rows apart, is the woman has to go to the back of the bus. So if the woman is sitting in the front of the bus, they have to go to the back. So Ranit will get on a bus and sit up front, and the men will go absolutely crazy. And it's a matter of, do we support an Israel that allows that type of thing, woman to the back of the bus? Or do we want an Israel where there's equality? The other thing, I was in Israel, and I was staying in Modine with Leah, who's been also to our temple many times. And her son had just gotten out of the military. Now her husband was a retired general, who the military was very important to. And the father was really hoping his son, after the first 3 years, would stay in as a career. And I said to him, so you're not staying in? He goes, oh no, I would never stay in. He goes, I'm thinking of leaving Israel. And I was kind of shocked. And I said, why? He goes, because the Haredi want to stop buses and trains on Shabbat. And he goes, I have 1 day off a week. From Modin, you can't get anywhere without a bus or a train. And he goes, I'm not telling them they have to get on a bus or a train, but I want a bus or a train for me. He goes, if they're in power, we're going to lose that. So a few years ago, they do all the work on the train. If any of you go to New York City, you know, in the middle of the night, you go to get in a subway and it'll be canceled because they're working on it. Well, in Israel, they work on the subways on Shabbat, and everyone knows that. But they pretend it doesn't happen. The Haredi, again, revolted and said to Netanyahu, if you allow workers to work on the trains on Shabbat, we're leaving the government. And they were going to shut that down. They couldn't shut it down because there's no other time they could actually work on the trains. But so there's a lot of little interwoven issues that we as Americans are used to separation of church and state. And many of us now are worried that that boundary is dissolving.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a big issue for many of us. So what we're looking at is the reform movement in Israel can stand up for and say, we want a pluralistic society. We're not trying to take away anything from the religious Jews or the Haredi Jews, but we want equal rights.
Right. So, you want to say something?
We're going to be wrapping up in a few minutes.
Yeah.
So I was just going to summarize.
I
but you answer
can
first.
stay until 10:30, and then you guys can. I have to go to Chicago to a rabbinic conference, so I have to catch a plane. Did you have a question, Carl?
No,
Chicago. Yeah. Exactly. Chicago. So so that's what you're saying, Ron, is very true. And then the thing is that, by the way, many of my Reform colleagues, very esteemed ones in Israel, their energy was always like, we got to fight the orthodoxy. We got to fight. My temperament is different. Maybe you know me a little bit. I try not to be against something. I try to be pro what I want to do. My rabbinate in Israel too was always, I don't want to go spend all my time protesting against ultra-Orthodox. They can live their life. I want to build the Judaism that I believe in. I want to make it attractive. So I would try to make beautiful, Shabbat services, and I would work on doing meaningful high holiday prayers, and I would, teach children and officiate weddings and do all those things that I thought and build organizations of interfaith. In other words, my choice was always to create a positive alternative and show people, hey, listen, this is the way to do it, right? Other than my friends went to the Supreme Court and support, did all the, the kind of like the aggressive anti-ultra-Orthodox. I was like, I'd rather spend my time on actually building the reform option and showing Israelis that this is the way to go, right? And I found it to be very effective. Not that I'm saying that let those who like to go and fight. It was just not my temperament. And it was very effective. And once again, a lot of, as a younger rabbi in Israel, my way to make a living, where if I got a little bit of a budget to hire musicians or to advertise some activity or to get some help, that was those budgets. All right. So the reform movement in Israel get a lot of their budget from the Jewish agency. The Jewish agency gets their budget is allocated according to these elections, right? So this is how you can make a difference. I want to say one more point. Sometimes people say, why should Jews who live in America have say about what's happening in Israel? Right? Sometimes people say, I live here, I should vote here. Let the Israelis decide how they want to allocate their budgets. People are reluctant to interfere because they say, hey, what if a bunch of Israelis, interfere with the American elections or New York State elections or whatever, right? So I say that, well, in one sense, if we live here, we don't vote in the Israeli parliament, in the Knesset. We don't vote in the general elections. That we can leave to Israelis, but we should have a say, because I think that one of the main principles of democracy is if this thing has an effect on me, I should have an effect in it. Right? If that thing, if that entity has influence over my life, I should have a say about that entity. Right? It's a very principle, like no taxation without representation, right? It's a very basic principle of that. And Israel affects our lives. Right? Israel, the homeland of the Jewish people, the way that it's run, the values that come out of it, the vibe that it creates in the world, the policies that it implements, it has an effect on Jewish people everywhere. For one thing is because we want to know that when we come to visit Israel, if we ever come living there or whatever it is, for whatever reason, it remains a country where Jews like us feel comfortable, right? That our values are protected, are respected, right? When we go there, and also because as we know maybe better than before, since the past events, is that whatever happens in Israel affects the well-being, the safety, the life of Jews all around the world, including in this country. Therefore, we should have a say. And our way to have a say, among other things, there's more than one way, is to vote and to ask our friends and family and relations to vote. We can really make a difference, okay? And the Orthodox in this country, God bless them, you know that they're organized. Their communities are organized, their families are large. If the rabbi says something, they actually listen, as opposed to here, they actually like, oh, the rabbi said we have to do something. They actually believe that they have to do that. Here it's like, oh, so the rabbi said, okay, whatever. We'll do what we want to be, but which is fine. This is how it's fine. We're not an authoritarian religion, right? But then so they're giving a good fight, and which they are, it's legitimate. They're allowed to do that, right? They also want to influence Israel. We should do the same, right? And maybe one more comment. More generally speaking, some of you have been, and you know that recently we started in this synagogue an Israel committee. It's still in the making. It's still being built. It's still being created. We had 2 meetings. It was loads of fun. David Rothenberg came to like 50% of the meetings, the 2 meetings. And if you care about Israel, if you want to help build, the Temple Sinai will have more significant relations with Israel, possibly a trip to Israel in the future, possibly collaborations, different things. You're more than welcome to join this committee, and this is going to be very helpful. If good people who can join that committee, you can also make a difference in that way. Vicky.
One last question.
He's dangerous. He starts to ask questions. I'm going to miss my plane.
So the Orthodox community has lots of components.
What's that?
The Orthodox community has lots of components in Israel. There's nobody that's sympathetic to the reform.
Oh yeah, it's not. I also shouldn't paint Orthodoxy as. Look, I grew up Orthodox, modern Orthodox. Okay, my father is Orthodox. My grandfather. Some of my best friends are Orthodox. It's not. There's from the ultra Orthodox to the very nationalist to like moderate. There's for example, the Hartman Institute, where my father worked and taught for many years as a scholar. All the Reform rabbis who come to Israel in the summer, they go to the Hartman Institute seminar to learn, and it's an Orthodox place, and it's very supportive of Reform rabbis. When I was, and it's not all bad. The Orthodox rabbi where I lived in the Galilee, so he had an office in the county, in the town hall. Yeah, it wasn't a town; it was a county. It was a rural county. But yes, here's the governor's office. Here's the Orthodox rabbi's office. He was the rabbi. He had, an office, a secretary, budgets. He would run the cemetery. He was the rabbi. I was just like, who the hell are you, right? And however, and by the way, it's also the relationship that you build. This, if you come and say this Orthodox rabbi is the enemy, I got to fight him. Guess what? He's going to fight you.
Right.
But I was respectful to him, and we built kind of. I wouldn't say that I don't think that he loved me. But we had kind of like a nice relation, to the point and degree that when I needed to borrow a Torah of his to officiate at a bat mitzvah, he would lend it to me. He would. He knew that, he knew he doesn't officiate bat mitzvahs because he doesn't, right? But he knew that I was doing it. He knew that the family was secular Jewish. He said, I'd rather you go and do that bat mitzvah than they have nothing at all. And if you need my Torah, here it is. Okay? So, and when we'd meet like on Sukkot to But we tease each other, kind of friendly teasing, but he never would give me a budget. He never would accommodate, but he tolerated it, right? So
Nobody lobbies for more liberalism within to allow for the Orthodox movement to support reform.
so they will not look. So again, the Orthodox movement is also not that organized. It's got many synagogues. The more, let's say, the more liberal, progressive fringes of Orthodoxy will be tolerant. By the way, they're also influenced. I know my cousin is an Orthodox Jew who lives not too far from Modin in Shoham, and they go to an Orthodox synagogue where women read from the Torah and are counted for a minyan. So they're also influenced by us, you see, because then the more, and this is not very common, but still they see, oh, so if you're not going to let women read from the Torah, they're all going to go to the Reform synagogue across the street. So it's not all bad, and it's not like the Orthodoxy part of the enemy, and it really depends on the person and also how you treat them, and right?
Do they lobby for institutional change?
No,
Not at all.
no,
Zero.
they would not. Unlikely. Some do, but only on the margins. Yeah. All right. Yes.
I was going to summarize, but the summary you gave before answering David's question was the perfect summary, which is that we really need to vote. If anybody here has not voted, I know many of you have, but if you have not voted, we're happy to help you online vote. If you know somebody that can't do it online, I do have paper ballots. There's all sorts of rules. Each paper ballot has to be sealed in its own envelope, blah, blah, blah. But if anybody wants help voting electronically, and then what we did is over here, we have a little map of Israel, and think of it as a way to fill up our fundraising goal. This is going to be our voting goal, and Hannah's going to reproduce more so that we can have as many of these as we have stickers. So if you've already voted, come up and put your stickers on.
We should have a party next time.
Yeah. Cocktail party.
Thank you so much.
David, you're organizing the next one. Every 5 years. Next year it's you. Next 5 years.
Does anybody need help voting?
I just did it. Well, that's what I was doing.
Good.
That's what I was trying.
pretty easy.
Yeah. Can I have a paper one too for my grandma?
Yes.